Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Atkinson, Senior Editor at Supply Chain Brain, and I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today, sponsored by EdgeVerve, the topic for which is Value Network, the way forward for a resilient supply chain. Given the massive market disruptions supply chains have recently faced, agility and flexibility are key in responding swiftly to unpredictable demand patterns. We'll explore how enterprises need to rethink their global supply chain models, assess opportunities for continued growth, and create strategies to protect their businesses against demand-supply shocks and continue to compete in the global economy. Our speakers today are George Laurie, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. George is a member of Forrester's Advanced Manufacturing team. He researches supply chain and product lifecycle management platforms that empower chief operating officers and vice presidents of supply chains to transform their enterprises within different industries. We're also going to hear from Suresh Bharadwaj, who is AVP and Product Head for TradeEdge at EdgeVerve. Suresh has led successive technology startups to significant value by creating globally recognized products and platforms in the areas of warehouse management, logistics, and sales execution. A great motivator and mentor, Suresh is also an entrepreneur and a co-founder of Manhattan Associates, a global leader in supply chain solutions. We're going to start with a keynote presentation from George. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with me, George, and Suresh. After that, if we have time, we'll move on to answering questions from the audience. So we've got a lot going on today, and I'm sure it will be very interesting. Just to remind you, please submit your questions at any time during the presentation at the link at the bottom of your screen. We will not be using people's titles or company names, so feel free to ask anything you want. If you don't see your question during the webinar, please be assured the EdgeVerve team will reach out to you offline. So with that, I'm going to hand off to George. George, take it away.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks everybody else for joining us in this session. What I'm going to do in the next few minutes is to relate to you based on our research, and my job at Forrester really is to talk to people just like you, to understand their problems and to understand the solutions that they're adopting. So I'm going to look really at the role of real-time insights across channels to help build this resilient supply chain. I'm going to look at how we can break down the silos of information and how we can really start to build an autonomous enterprise that's based on insight and mostly insight about demand as well as supply. I'm going to look at how enterprises can get a much better or greater level of visibility about sales, inventory, and orders right across their value network. So that said, I think we've known for a long time, certainly for 30 years, we've dealt with different types of demand and supply variability. We've seen some extreme examples recently, but for years we've known that our forecasts are wrong. And we've built in some kind of ability to manage that forecast error. For years we've known that lead time varies from time to time, and we've built that in. What we've tended to do is to build a kind of a network that enables us to cushion against those problems of excess demand or perhaps a constraint in supply. And we've learned to plan our inventory. In the past, we've been able to do it with very simple variables, to be able to just track sales perhaps down at the store level for each stock keeping unit, to track the sales, to do a weighted moving average, to put in a bit of seasonality, and maybe to add some promotions. And that's been good enough, but it really doesn't work anymore. 30 years ago, I used to do this kind of planning, used to work out where we were going to put warehouses and lease trucks, because we had a center of demand. This delightful little GIF, it shows a center of demand moving around. And why is it moving around? It's moving around because people are shopping across multiple channels. They're not just shopping in stores. So e-commerce has made the demand itself more volatile, and the location of it's also made people much, much more impatient. They expect to get their online orders really quickly. And that's one of the things that's driven, when we ask people about their omnichannel priorities, it's driven them to think they must have a much clearer view of their in-store inventory so that they can hold it for you if you want to click and collect, so they can send it to you. So all that kind of thing has made it much more difficult for them to manage the complexity that previously managed really with quite simple data. Not only that, but they're inventing new fulfillment options for stores. Why? In order to keep the store alive, they're trying to make it more exciting for people to perhaps return in store. If they bought online and they're going to return in store, you've got them there in the store. You might be able to sell them something else. So it means another complexity really around managing their inventory. Sometimes people ask me, could we take that returned inventory in the store and could we perhaps repurpose it? Can we resell it? And the answer is, yeah, probably not. You're probably going to have to do something, probably have to clean it and rehang it, maybe repair some damage to it, and maybe it's not assorted for that store at all. So all that means that they need a much clearer view from multiple different directions of what their inventory is, what their sales, what their returns are. Now, sometimes syndicated data can help with this. You can get some assistance, and it's been getting better and better. The latency has been reduced. The level of granularity has improved. The challenge with that syndicated data is it's just a sample. If you're just looking at a sample, and maybe your online competitor, perhaps Amazon, is looking at the entire market, and perhaps they're looking at search engine arguments as well. They know whether people want yellow ones or purple ones in your area, and maybe you don't. So the syndicated data is only a part of a solution, although many people do use it to help them with promotions, even with flash promotions, to know, well, within a matter of hours, whether a promotion is working in a particular location or not. And we've also seen people do something similar around new product introductions. So enabling them to use that syndicated data to see, is a new product selling or not? But here's the challenge: to really be successful, I need to predict in advance if it was going to sell. So I need a lot more data. I need data about what people are looking for. So I know what color and what size to put in what location. I need to know, are they looking for bows or frills? All that kind of thing doesn't normally come just from syndicated data. You need a much broader collection of data, and you need to manage it yourself, and you need to mine it for insight. And that's really why a couple of months ago, we surveyed all of our clients and we asked them which supply chain technologies seem to be most important to you. Which ones are you investing in? Which ones are you divesting from? And the interesting thing here is that many of them thought about supply chain, not just about the supply side, but about the demand side. And they figured that actually a lot of their challenges were around demand. And we saw that, I think, a little bit during the pandemic. So yes, were there shortages in supply? There were, but there were peaks in demand beforehand where people stocked up on powdered milk or rice. Later, we had some more problems with supply because people hadn't been at the powdered milk plant making any more. But the point is that people are thinking a lot about how to anticipate demand through that supply chain. And if you can anticipate demand, there are various things you can do about supply. Supply will always be less elastic than demand, but the trick first is to understand demand. And that's why I want to just spend a moment on a couple of these categories. So right up there in the investment category, you saw demand signal repositories. What are those demand signal repositories doing? They're pulling together a wide variety of data. To be sure, they're pulling historical data, but they're also pulling predictive variables. If you're in consumer durables, you already use things like the expected interest rate or perhaps people's take-home wages. We've seen people also use things like the coefficient of reinfection. So when John Hopkins was still publishing that, people were using that to say, what might that mean about demand in a different location? And as I already said, your pure play competitors are using lots and lots of other data as well. Google Analytics, perhaps their own search engine data. So the real key thing here is that you need some way of pulling together all these different demand signals, and you need to be able to drive some kind of insight out of them. And really, you need to manage that yourself. Now, you can see that that's why our respondents in this survey thought this was a high value kind of technology. Interestingly, not particularly expensive either. The second thing they thought was really high value was integrated business planning. What does that mean? It means a single view of demand that's driving our insight and our action across, yes, our marketing, yes, our supply chain, but also our finance. That's saying, does this actually make sense for us to be listing this on Google Shopping or on Amazon? Are we actually making money on it or not? And also perhaps driving other actions. So does it make sense to air freight these blouses now that they've really taken off and people have decided they like frills and yellow really is the color? Would it make sense to do the reorder and to air freight it? Or should we perhaps make it onshore? So that kind of thing, that integrated business plan, and enabling you perhaps also to drive automated actions, maybe even spending more or less on Google AdWords based on what you find in your integrated business plan is important. And I talked a lot so far about retail, but the same thing really applies to branded manufacturers. They're all selling online. They're all worried about what that really takes in terms of their marketing effort, and they're worried about pulling together data that will help them. And here, they're selling through marketplaces. The marketplaces have more data than they do. They have more insight. So for all of them, it's pretty vital to get a grip of this and to understand more of it. All of them thinking about drop ship models and thinking this will simplify things, perhaps. But the interesting thing is it doesn't absolve you from the need to have data and to understand what's happening to that data. I had this particularly with people who perhaps rely on a marketplace's forecasting. And they've said the marketplace forecast is not as good as the forecast that we could have done for ourselves. Notice how much they worry about the additional costs, the integration, the promotion and fulfillment costs. And they need more data to help them to resolve that.
Thank you, George. That was very informative. I love that you acknowledged that we've known for a long time that forecasts are wrong. That's very true, isn't it? I'm sure everybody would agree with that.
The only thing we know about the forecast that it's wrong.
Yes, that's the only thing we know for sure. So now we're going to move to a panel discussion about all this with George and Suresh. So Suresh, again, is AVP and product head for TradeEdge at EdgeVerve. So let's dig in. So I'm going to start with a question for both of you. What does it mean for supply chains to be agile? We hear this all the time. We need agile supply chains. And why is it crucial for enterprises, especially in these unpredictable times, to be nimble? Suresh.
Sure. Thanks, Ellen. The agility, if you really look at it, can also be said as how responsive can I be to a situation in the markets. If you're in the planning, function and you're looking to see what do I produce, where do I position it, you really need to know what's selling in the markets, not a month after the event has happened, not a week, but as soon as it happens. So my ability to plan things will depend on how quickly I get those demand signals, visibility to such demand. And so that is one part. When it comes to execution, no matter, like we just said, no matter how much you spend in planning, we said the forecast is always going to be wrong. And so if you really look at that, how can I recover from those errors in forecasting? So this is really where it comes into the execution space, where you say, like, yeah, I was expecting the demand to come from a certain location, but it's coming from somewhere else. Now, what do I do? Right? So how do I bring responsiveness in execution? How do I either take the order to where the inventory is or vice versa, and how do I do that with speed? So even there, real-time visibility becomes a key enabler. And so to be able to be responsive to, where demand might be coming from or has come from historically, or even in the last week, last month, and therefore be able to, plan your production and inventory positioning better to actually executing, on the ground, in real time is what agility is all about.
Yeah, that's very important. And George, tell me how do you approach nimbleness and agility?
Well, I think it's everything that Suresh said is true. The challenge is, of course, around visibility, just what he said, particularly if you're, say, selling through channel partners. How much I have and what it costs and what I can sell it for, they sound like very simple questions. But where is all that data? Yeah, some of it's in an order management system, some of it's in your old ERP, some of it's else. So actually pulling all that together, and then, particularly if you've got different sources of supply, exactly as Suresh said, so I could take this demand and I could fulfill some of it a long way away where it perhaps is quite cheap, but it takes a long time to get here. Or I could fulfill some of it very close where it's a bit expensive, but I can be more flexible. So taking that you need a lot of data to do that. And it needs to inform the decision really, really quickly, because you don't have a long time to put it all in a spreadsheet and sit around discussing it. It's one of the things, if you ask anybody, how long does it take to change the price of something? Oh, it takes forever because so many people are involved in it. How long does it take to Amazon to change the price? No time at all. They do millions and millions of unattended price changes. Why? Because all that data is there. So you need to have that data, and you need to have the insight from it, and it needs to connect to action is the other thing.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you. So I've got a question for you, Suresh. What are the key challenges a business might face in becoming agile? I think particularly with this thing that that George raised, which is you've got all this data, but it's in silos, and you need to be able to aggregate it so that it's actually useful and actionable.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Helen. Siloed data is definitely what we're all looking at. Even if you look at within the enterprise, you have data sitting in different systems. So the sales function may be looking at their version of truth, if I can call that, which is different from what the supply chain is looking and what finance might be looking. So there are, and a lot of these silos are actually perpetuated by software or systems that people have used over a period of time, and which is why you have processes like SNOP to bring all of these parties, internal partners together, because can we all agree on some common numbers and say this is what we are looking at. And this is, I'm just talking about just looking within the enterprise. But in today's world, when you look at what's happening, a lot of the data that you need is outside the enterprise. To the extent that it's probably 80% of the data that's outside the enterprise. And so you can only imagine the challenges around bringing such data in. And then, you really need to work with partners, who may or may not be willing to collaborate with you. That's a bigger problem to solve. And then there are other problems to solve in terms of, how do I make it easy for them to collaborate with me? So there is technology out there to help you do that. But I think we need to address these data silos from both angles. From a business angle, where you can communicate the need to collaborate, create incentives for them to do that, and at the same time, don't try to run this through mandates where this shy away from collaborating with you, because the question of what's in it for me needs to be answered first, and then I think they're going to come to the table. So it is both internal and external. And can we get to that single version of truth that we all can agree, yes, this is the same page that we're going to read out of, right? So that, to me, is where the challenges are.
Right. So it's really important to build these relationships and get a collaborative culture going in your extended supply chain with your partners, not just deal with the alphabet soup of CRM and SFA and ERP and all that, although that's important too. George, let's talk about technology. Let's talk about the alphabet soup a little bit. How can one leverage technology to unify demand and supply forecasts and build a resilient and sustainable supply chain?
Yeah, so it's interesting because people have traditionally done this with two different sorts of systems. They've had different people looking at demand, different people looking at supply. And to some extent, you can see why they've done that. It's kind of made sense. But what we're seeing more and more now is people looking for a more, and Suresh has just said it, more a kind of a collaborative supply network where actually we share that demand with other people, and some kind of collaboration where we, let's say, share our capacity to respond. Now, he talked about the kind of human angle of this. One place where you can really see this and see the technology working well is in, let's say, the aftermarket for automotive. So all the dealers will share their inventory. You're thinking, why are they doing that? They're sharing it because it promotes the brand. It helps the customer to get their, whatever it is, car back on the road in 2 hours. And what we're seeing more and more is people saying, yeah, what we would like would be to do that kind of thing and to think of ourselves as not really competing with each other, as competing with the other supply chain for the customer. So how do we need to do this? We need a platform to do it. And there are platforms that are emerging to do this. And first thing the platform has to do is to pull data together. Next thing is to syndicate it in a controlled way and to drive shared insight that is beneficial to everybody, because ultimately your supply chain is going to win against the other supply chain with the customer. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes, I think I'm tempted to use that there was that buzzword a few years ago, co-opetition.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think it caught on, but that is the spirit of it, isn't it? You really are going to gain value from sharing information and collaborating. That's
yeah. I mean, the thing is that also the whole of supply chain used to be run by purchasing people who were looking for a low-cost supplier. Now it's not a low-cost supplier that we want. It's a supplier that will innovate with us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important. So, but let me stay a little bit with the technical side, because it all sounds great. You know, we're all going to collaborate, we're all going to share data, whatever. I think, but I'd like to ask both of you: is integration good enough right now for most companies? What are your thoughts on that, Suresh?
You know, at the very minimum, you need to have integration. And again, you know, when I talk about integrating with external partners, and that is hard, you know. And I've said these partners could come in various shapes and sizes in terms of their business. Could be $1 billion business, a partner, and maybe at the other end, if you're really looking at the emerging markets, and I'm talking about in a global market situation, these could be real small distributors who are family-owned businesses. They may barely have some technology in their offices, and be able to send you an Excel and say, look, I can send you an Excel through an email. So how do you integrate with such small partners, right? So we cannot expect everyone to be equal in terms of technology maturity. So and therefore integration itself becomes hard. And I would go to the extent of saying that integration is good if you have relatively longer planning cycles, and maybe you can get the data in and really sift through that, try to make sense out of it. All of that is good. But in the world where we live in today, where we're talking about the online sales going through the roof, and the new products being introduced in the markets also going orders of at least an order of dimension higher or more. The question is, how do I react to all of these in real time? Because there is a consumer who's sitting in front of his laptop or maybe on her phone, placing orders and expecting to know where my order is at any point in time. It's not just placing the order, but getting an acknowledgement, getting the ability to track and trace that order until delivery. All of this requires real-time integration, right? And so that means I not only need to be able to get the data in, but I really need to understand what my other partner is telling me. Where I go with this is, when you come to big developed markets, modern retail, while they have the ability to integrate, your partners also have their own systems and they have their own, ways of working, which means while there are standards that exist in the industry, you can look at GS1, there could be UPC, EAN, and all of that stuff. Yet, for historical reasons, there are, systems which have their own product codes. Companies have their own product codes. I just take product code as an example. So when they are saying this is what is ordered on my system, you don't know what it is because it doesn't directly translate to what product code it is on your product master. So just to be able to harmonize product data itself is a huge task.
Yes.
Right? And therefore, will integration solve the problem? Probably not. So we're looking more at how can I drive more interoperability. This is the next step up from integration, which means, and I talked about reading from the same page, a single version of truth. Now this has to, work at a much more granular level, and the same thing is true for locations. So these are basic building blocks. When I talk about a location, I want to make sure you and I are talking about the same warehouse, same facility, same store, and so on. And the same thing is true for product data as well. So how do I drive, interoperability so that I don't have to spend hours or days, trying to figure out what you actually told me, is that same as what I'm thinking it is. So the data harmonization becomes a key element of driving interoperability. Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot. George, what do you have to say about that?
I just wanted to say, that everything that Suresh said there was ringing a bell with me, that somebody did a study a couple of years ago and found that something like 30% of purchase orders have at least one data element wrong. And sometimes it's the actual item that they're ordering. Why? Because there's so many variants of it. And we've had all sorts of efforts to standardize that. And it's still amazingly a challenge. I think some people are beginning to apply AI to help to try to sort this out. The other thing Suresh said about, yes, that's the world of modern trade, but lots of people you communicate with might still be sending you a fax. And so you need to be able to absorb that. You need to apply some intelligence to it and say, what does this fax mean? Now I can bring it into my whole picture of the world. So your platform needs to do that, and might also need to make some guesses, not just about the format of the data, but what does it mean? When I send you a price, it's price net of VAT, but I might send one to Suresh, there's net of VAT and net of some discount as well. So you need something that says, well, not only what is this data element, but what does it really mean? And it's still a huge, this was, when I first started working in 1977 was the day when EAN published the standard. I thought, this is great. We're all going to be doing it. And here we are, some decades later, still struggling with that. But I think the platforms have an opportunity to help with this and to say, well, everybody who's working with us, this is what we mean when we say price. We have these elements, here's discount and so on. So it's some research I'm working on now that the platforms themselves might help to be the arbitrators of this.
Right. And it sounds like, I know that some of the people listening to this will be like, oh my goodness, I have to type in something from a fax. But the point is, once you get these systems working and responsive, then you're able to really work magic.
You don't have to type in anything from a fax.
Okay.
The fax it's already in a digital format. You can, if it's on paper, you can scan it with OCR, but it's a digital thing.
Fantastic. Great.
That made it come out on that time. So, but what you might need is some kind of AI to look at it and say, what does this really mean?
Yeah. Right. And technology is really your friend with this. And indeed, that leads me on to talking about these multi-enterprise value networks, these platforms that can help in transforming supply chain, and particularly with the data. So let's talk a little bit about how that works and what value those networks and platforms deliver. Suresh, can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when you, again, I go back a little bit to the integration aspect. So, I'll take an example of a customer who was trying to do this with their customer, trying to bring in point of sale information. And they did this as an internal project. And it took them 6 months to actually bring all of that external point of sale data in and start driving some analytics out of that. And they figured out, hey, look, if it took me 6 months to do one customer, I want to get visibility to my top 10 customers. But I do this internally, and I only have so many resources, and I do it sequentially. It's going to take me 5 years to get visibility to what my top 10 customers are doing, and that's way too long. No one has that kind of a time frame, and things change. 5 years in today's world is an eternity, right? So that's one thing that led them to start looking for it. There must be a better way of accelerating these connections with my partners, and therefore how do I bring them on board more quickly. So that's one part. When you look at what's happened in the last couple of years with the disruptions on the supply side, and this is typical of let's say apparel and fashion industry, where the planning lead times are anywhere from 12 to 18 months, right? And a lot of things get actually manufactured, say in Asia Pacific or outside the US, definitely out in the Far East. The risks could be anywhere in that supply chain. You typically work with your tier 1 suppliers, and they may only be making the semi-finished goods or components that go into the final finished product, but then they may be relying on other suppliers, which is a tier 2 supplier, who is actually responsible for raw materials, for example. And the risk could emanate anywhere. It could be that the risk is coming, there's a shortage in some commodity, some raw material, and therefore there's going to be a delay in that semi-finished component to be produced. But you as a company is probably the last one to get to know that, right? Because you're only dealing with your tier 1 supplier, and unless he gives you a heads up on, hey, things are actually not looking that good because I'm getting delayed on my supplies, you don't get to know that. And so you want to be able to get to know that as soon as any risk emanates at any level in your tiered supply side, right? So I'm taking these 2 examples to show the limitations of doing this, one partner at a time or one supplier at a time, whether it's on the demand side or on the supply side. So that is where a network actually, the network construct brings all of these parties together on the same platform and really tries to break down the hierarchy. So look, everyone is equal on this platform in terms of the ability to share information, right? And we will take out the complexity of integrating each one individually, because that's going to take a lot of time, and then create that interoperability where I don't have to be harmonizing data from one partner, which is very different from how I harmonize data with another partner, because harmonization of such data is going to be integral to such network. So create a many-to-many conversations across all of these partners or parties in the network. So that's the big role that a network plays in this, and significantly reduces the effort and enhances visibility to everyone else. So it's not always me with all my partners, but how those partners communicate with each other can be significantly accelerated.
Right, so it's really about being able to get visibility into your partners, exactly, and have this very open network where people can share information. Exactly. And I think you had some figures to share about specific value delivered in partner network visibility.
Yeah, just connecting, with your, the example that we take is on the demand side, and again in an emerging markets context, where they were, this, our customer was running, fill rates of about, 70 to 75%, less than 80%. And if you went and spoke to the distributor, saying, what is your fill rate? They would say, oh, my fill rate is 100%. The interesting aspect of that is what was happening on the ground was that when the distributor sales rep went to the retail store to take an order, the sales rep already knew, what kind of inventories existed in the distributor's warehouse. So if the customer placed an order for a product that was not in stock in the distributor warehouse, he would refuse to take an order for that item, saying, hey, look, I can't supply that.
Yeah.
So the 100% fill rate was by design. So you would take orders for only those items that you have in stock.
Right.
Right, and therefore
that works. Yeah.
So this leader for customer organization, when he was actually scratching his head, saying, really, how are you guys able to get 100% fill rates when we are struggling with this in the US or in North America? So it wasn't apparent until he actually went on a route sales and figured this out. Okay, this is what's happening, right? Mm. So the point is that you want to get access to demand or raw demand the way it is happening. So there may be other elements of how to train or incentivize your salespeople not to capture true demand, but say they're not going to be at a disadvantage, but really tell them, please bring the actual demand. And then just that element created visibility to true demand and therefore the true case fill rates, if you will. And then when the company started looking at why are these partners not keeping up higher case fill rates, they found that their own fulfillment with distributors was much lower, and they were not fulfilling the distributor orders, right? And therefore the distributors are out of stock, and that had a cascading effect. They said, look, we're now going to make sure that we will keep you in stock all the time as long as I get that daily secondary sales visibility. So that improved the case fill rates by anywhere from 6 to 10%. Wow. So yeah, that's the metric I wanted to share.
That's a great metric. Yeah.
The second thing it did was they were also able to get visibility to distributor inventories. So they figured out, hey, there's a lot of inventory that is sitting out there that he's not able to sell, and they didn't know that. And now they were able to liquidate that, create room for new products. So they're able to, release some working capital for the distributor, by getting rid of, non-productive inventory, if you will. That was to the extent of over 3 to 4%. So those are some direct benefits that we were able to document.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's very impressive. It's always good to put some hard figures on things. I know sometimes it's difficult, but just to give people an idea. George, here's a question for you. Does adoption of value network platform require replacing sorry, do we need to replace our ERP or legacy systems, which we've just paid millions of dollars and spent 12 years installing, and everybody's tearing their hair out? Is it necessary to completely start from scratch to start the digital transformation journey?
Helen, I think you're leading the witness a bit there. No, we don't. That just wouldn't happen. I mean, there's a quite separate strand of what's going on there. They are replacing them, but it's nothing to do with what we're talking about here. That, I mean, really for decades, people with quite disparate ERPs used to communicate with B2B networks. They used to send EDI, the network would harmonize it. What we're talking about now is the network effect. We're doing it much more quickly and much more intelligently, rather than having to just literally map. Suresh talked about people having their own weird product codes, which of course they do. Well, now you can have some intelligence that can go, yeah, I know what that is, and translate it into what the community meaning of that code is. And can do that really, really rapidly, not, overnight or something like that. So no, I don't think we're going to see people tell people, you must get rid of your ERP and have another one to play this game. We have seen people, we talked about GS1. A lot of ERPs used not to have GS1 attributes in there. Most of the vendors brought out a kind of GS1 complement. So you had more of this data. So do ERPs lack all the data that they need? Yeah, and that's why people have PIMs as well to manage all the other types of content. But no, we're not going to tell people they have to change their ERP now.
Great, thank you, George. So here's another question for both of you. Talk a little bit about e-commerce. Consumers are shifting online to shop, and however, brand sites and distribution systems are not e-commerce ready to fulfill individual consumer demands. Do you see a paradigm shift where brands are going to move more towards a direct-to-consumer model? Suresh, what do you think?
I think it is a business imperative for most manufacturers in some way to address consumer expectations. Whether they actually fulfill this on their own using their own logistics is another matter. I see there are two kinds of shifts that are happening. One is where big manufacturers are also reconfiguring their warehouses where they used to their warehouses were primarily designed to ship full truckloads on pallets, and now when you start getting consumer orders, you're now looking at eaches, individual units, and so they would need to reconfigure the warehouses to be able to handle that. So that is one shift that is happening. Now, is this going to happen across all kinds of product categories? Probably not. Where I've seen from my own personal interaction with our customers is it is happening in certain product categories. For example, bulky items. If it is paper products and primarily which are not heavy but take up a lot of volume, where the retailers don't necessarily want to consume their warehouse space storing these, right? So they're deferring or creating dropship orders to manufacturers to say that why don't you guys ship it directly? So that's one thing that we see happening.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I am also seeing many of the brand sites are primarily used for product information only. It's about branding. It's about answering questions around what a consumer might have about the product ingredients, sustainability, a lot of things that go around the brand promise. But not all of them have commerce capability today. If you go to many of the brand sites, so the question there is, can I enable commerce without having to actually get into the details of fulfilling that order, a consumer order I'm talking about, right? Because it's one thing to to let the consumer have a certain experience about the brand, but now when you actually start getting into delivering orders, the consumer experience now expands into the delivery experience as well. So it might not be the same as what you're getting when you're going to a retailer site and placing an order. But at the same time, as a brand, I want to know my consumer better. And so this is where we're saying the brands could actually enable commerce, take the order. Today, what happens is they if I want to buy, they say, okay, here are my list of fine retailers, you can go and buy the product over there. So they transfer you to a retailer site, right? But then they lose track of what you do when you go to the retailer site. Who knows? For all you care, you might end up buying a competing product, and you don't, as a brand, I don't even know that, right? So is there a solution to that? Potentially there is. You could still capture the order on the brand side and then transfer the order to the retailer and say, look, you fulfill it because you have the network, you have the store near the consumer home address, so you can probably deliver it better. And you're anyway used to picking eaches and smaller pack sizes, so you can your supply chain is geared to handle individual orders better than mine. So this is really like having the cake and eating it too. I get to know the consumer, I know what he's ordering, but I don't have to fulfill it.
Yeah.
And then of course consumers have all kinds of expectations in terms of ordering online, picking up at a store, delivered to my home address, return in a store. So for all of those, you really need to have this network architecture come to life, a business architecture. It actually goes beyond technology, but I'll stop there. There's a lot of business agreements that need to get in place, in terms of enabling the sale and realizing the revenues and so on. But this is a foundation that we need to start with.
Right, that's really interesting, and I think it's where agility comes into play again, because I saw a report recently saying that I think it was Target is now, if you order for a purchase online but pick up in store, and then you change your mind, you realize you haven't got time and you want to switch quickly to a either having it delivered or just curbside pickup, that they allow you to do that. The customer can do that. So they're agile enough to make that work. And I think that is going to be the future. George, you've got a more of a sort of high level view of trends in this area. What do you see happening?
Well, at the moment, we see about 40% of brands have some kind of direct to consumer program, or say they have. Now, the interesting thing about that is what they really want is to get people on subscription. But as Suresh pointed out, if they're used to shipping pallets, it's really hard to ship parcels instead of pallets. And it's doubly hard to do it, put them on this subscription, fulfill the IFRS 15 revenue recognition conditions of that. It's really, really hard, but they'd love to do it. I loved Suresh's story about maybe the brand could take the order and the retailer could fulfill it, because the retailer has a great system already, a great logistics to do that. And I had this conversation a couple of years ago with a brand and a retailer and said, why don't you do that instead of paying all these trade promotion fees? And they were both getting really excited about it. The retailer said, yeah, we wouldn't have to take the risk of this inventory on our balance sheet and wondering if it's going to, we'd love it. And then somebody else scratched their head and said, but wait, we have enough difficulty now fulfilling our own online orders from the store because we don't have the visibility. How are we going to do it if we have 40 brands doing it? And that's the thing, is that it sort of makes sense. I mean, it's interesting. If you look at Pepsi brands, you put in a $50 order in a metropolitan area in the US, they'll bring it to your door. That's really bulky, soda and Frito-Lay and stuff like that. So they can do it. They do it through a kind of crowdsourcing. And Coke, of course, bought a chain of coffee shops. They bought Costa for the same kind of reason, to be able to put the inventory close to people so that, if you want to build out a direct to consumer, you need to do that. It's so expensive though when the retailers have already done it. The brands would love to use the retail network. It just isn't quite ready to do yet.
But you see that in the future, maybe.
I hope it would be. It would make perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because the stores are where the people are.
Sure. But then, the United States Postal Service 15 years ago, here's the internet and people are going to start buying stuff on it and needing things delivered. Wouldn't it be great if we had a network where we could deliver something to everybody's home in the whole country? Oh, wait, no, somebody else has gone and done it now. Anyway. Here, and George, did you want to talk a little bit about the opportunity to sell off excess inventory? Because that sort of fits in here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's an avenue really to sell excess inventory this way. Suppliers can access, the online channels for liquidating inventory, and there's quite a lot of people who are doing this already. In fact, I know somebody who's got a kind of an add-on to SAP, so they look at slow movers and they move them all off onto eBay, which is really interesting thing to do with their slow-moving inventory. So I think, there are people definitely doing that. You can do bulk liquidation, or you can avoid doing bulk liquidation by doing it this way, by selling these goods through digital channels. So we definitely see people doing that and making money out of it. But it's not a hands-off thing. You have to put quite a lot of work into it. We skipped over a couple of slides that I had on what you have to do. There's still a fair amount of work there. And of course, a lot of brands talk about their experience of working through channels and the penalties that they get if they don't keep the inventory at the right level. If it's being fulfilled, let's say by Amazon, they get dinged a lot. So I get a lot of questions from people about how can I reduce the deductions file? They get a lot of deductions there. So that's also kind of worrying. I think that's maybe why this company was using eBay, because it's just kind of easier to list their stuff and off it went. So there's definitely people doing it, and it's an opportunity for you not to have to liquidate. I have other colleagues who worry about this and worry about what's the damage to the brand if you do that. Particularly if you're a premium brand, you're kind of thinking about, do I really want to do that? That's kind of, It's not as bad as liquidation, but it's still another kind of market. And you can imagine if you were, let's say, selling luxury shoes or handbags, you've got to be really careful how you manage that, because your distributors and your network are part of your value, and you actually ration inventory to them. They have to show you their pipeline of people in order for you to allocate them the handbag or the shoes or so on. So how are they going to feel when you're kind of selling it online? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to move into another question for both of you, and then I think we've got a couple of questions from the audience that I'd like to squeeze in. So looking to the future, how do you see supply chains continuing to evolve in this dynamic business environment? George?
Well, I think actually Suresh already hinted at this, that even the word supply chain, it sounds brittle, it sounds rigid. I think we're going to have networks, and every company is going to belong to more than one network. So in the past, when it was B2B markets, they went, oh, I must go where my customer is, or I must go where my potential suppliers are. Everybody is going to belong to at least two, one on the supply side, one on the customer side. And the networks themselves, and they'll be brokered by, let's say, vendors and systems integrators who will think about that. They'll help you to authenticate who you're dealing with, so you know actually who you're dealing with. They'll help you to share a demand signal and to securely share your capacity, and also to schedule and reschedule. So in any kind of system, in manufacturing, in distribution, you get messages that say, we're going to be short here, we're going to be over there. Can you delay those purchase orders? Can you expedite those ones or those work orders? And the system itself will make sure that when I expedite my purchase order, you expedite your production and your sales order. So I think that's what we'll see, that kind of synchronization. Suresh also talked about, the data and the meaning, that will be synchronized too. Right. Idealistic? Probably.
Good, we like being idealistic.
Yeah.
So, Suresh, what about you? What do you see for the future?
So, what I see is that the designation of companies or businesses as customers or vendors, to some extent, that is actually getting blurred, because the example that I gave you, if a brand and a retailer or a distributor or whoever, there is a certain rigid construct, like George said, where we have treated somebody as a customer all the time when the suppliers are someone else. But if you really, look at how, we want to maximize fulfillment, and the roles could reverse very easily. Like I said, it could be the brand which is taking the order and then passing it on to someone else for fulfillment. Mm-hmm. So now the question is, who is the customer and who is the supplier? Because somebody else is providing the service for you, right? So truly, if you look at it from that angle, anyone in the network could be a customer or a supplier, but it's in the context of a certain transaction. And therefore, the ability to work with each other is going to be very important, especially because logistics is playing such a central role in what's happening in supply chain today. It's not just about two companies owning their own logistics, but there are third-party companies which are coming together, and the ability to provide those services. And so the marketplace is not just limited to products. The marketplaces are now including services as well, like the ones like the 3PL services that I just referred to. And this is really, if we are thinking this is actually, far out in the future, I don't think so. It's actually happening right in front of our eyes. Some of the leaders have started, taking steps. There are, of course, going to be questions from business saying, am I going to be compromising too much? Is there some of my competitive advantage that's going to go away? I think there are ways to mitigate those, and I won't, in the interest of time, I won't get into those. But just to let you know, the technology is available today to actually bring this vision together.
That's amazing. So I've got, I want to get to one question from the audience, because but this is a big subject, but do you, both of you, do you foresee a shift away from just-in-time inventory as companies try to build more resilient supply chains? And how will this affect distribution centers and exacerbate or relieve the strain on labor and logistics services? George, maybe you could take that.
Just in time has made things affordable for us. What will happen is that technology will make just in time less brittle. What about the alleged shortage of everything? I think that will just resolve itself. You know, why are people not turning up to work? Why are they resigned? Because they're not paid enough. Why are they not paid enough? Because the marginal value of their hour is not high enough. But technology will make them worth more. So, you know, a lot of warehouses don't have any of the technology that you need to make them more effective and make people more productive. So I think we'll see more investment in technology, will make us more productive, will keep the price of things low, and will make people's wages rise. Optimistic.
Okay. Thank you, Suresh. What is just in time going away?
See, when we talk about just in time, we have always talked about the right product at the right place at the right time. And that's what just in time was all about. What is in question right now is what is the right place? You know, if the rigidity was to have this product in a certain store, but there is no demand for the product, you actually got it in the wrong place. And that's what was defining. Today, with technology that's available, with the kind of speed of integration that we're able to drive, the right place could be anywhere. Why do I have to be constrained to fulfilling a certain demand from a certain location, right? So you don't have to, completely lose just in time. It's just that you're going to orchestrate the demand to where the product might be, and therefore still accomplish that just in time. Having said that, if the whole focus until now was on efficiency, and now we're in the last 2 years, resilience has become the new buzzword for everyone. I think that question around just in time is still important, because if I can't get a product delivered to my house, when I need it, then I'm, it's part of my losing faith in that brand or in that, retailer or whoever, where I'm shopping. Maybe, over time that might erode, more and more. So just in time is still important, but
right.
How I deliver to that promise is changing. That's what it is about.
So it sounds like, and I'm afraid we're running out of time here, but it sounds like, if I may summarize, two of the takeaways from this are, yes, just in time, but just in place is probably as important, and that we need to get away from thinking about supply chains, these very rigid, brittle supply chains, and think more about networks and environments and landscapes of collaborative suppliers and supply chain partners. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We got a lot of questions. We will answer your questions offline, be assured. Also, we're going to be sending every registrant a copy of George's excellent presentation. So you'll be able to see all those little details that you couldn't quite see on your screen there. Thank you so much to George from Forrester and Suresh from EdgeVerve, and thanks to everyone out there for participating. We've learned a lot about how to build a more resilient supply chain. If you want to contact EdgeVerve, there's a contact info on your screen, and please, let's continue this conversation offline. Stay safe, stay happy, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.